My Reminiscences of PB by S.S. Gopalakrishnan, B.A., a former Indian secretary to PB. A strange fate once threw me into a peculiar position, a position from which I took note of the chief happenings in the inner lives of a few American and European brothers and sisters who were striving hard to learn and understand the highest truths of Indian and yoga and Eastern philosophy under the excellent, noble, and clear guidance of an unusual master who now and then disowned his mastership and buried himself in the hollow of the pyramids, or hid himself in the remotest villages of the Far East, or again ascended and lost himself in the freezing colds of the peaks of the highest mountain range. I refer to the one who was equally on close friendly relations with the matted-haired yogi or the Egyptian bushy-bearded Muslim, or the shaven-headed Supreme Lamas in China and the Buddhist countries. I am not a biographer, and so the reader will have to excuse me if he finds this to be scrappy, disjointed, and broken. For my part, I will be quite satisfied if this makes interesting reading and describes a few salient happenings and incidents which help to reveal, though in a poor way, this amazing person. I met him by a strange coincidence. Coincidence indeed, apparently, but really the strong hand of good karma that made me cross his path. When low in spirits, having been the victim of a big bank crash in South India, in which I had invested money and where I was employed as a subordinate officer and having wife and children to support. Spiritually jaded and exhausted in the maze of conflicting faiths, beliefs and opinions, I read A Search in Secret India. It exerted a peculiar influence over me. Day after day, the influence it had on me grew more and more until at last I could no longer resist the temptation of meeting its author. But as that book ended with his return to his native West, I erroneously thought he was still there and regarded such a meeting as impossible. After the above preface, you will not be surprised if you find yourself suddenly transported to a small country town in southwest India. The reddish roads are marked by their dusty quietness, except for a bullock cart or two, and odd villagers slowly passing occasionally, or the hurrying past of a stray cross-country motor bus. There is nothing to be seen or heard. The gentle breeze rustling through the leaves of coconut palms which line the road on one side at different points adds to the completely rural atmosphere. There is some sign of activity only in the main bazaar street. Coolies trotting with their baskets poised over their heads, a few villagers looking with open mouths at the display of dirty oil-fried cakes, the masses of yellow mangoes and brown berries, both ripe and unripe, heaped in groups on the floor of the fruit stall, clamorous haggling of the booth keepers, the noise of the harsh music of the gramophone record through the prehistoric horned instrument, the rattling of the tin pots of the tinker, the sonorous hiss of the hand blowpipe of the smith, are common sights and sounds that present themselves to you. A certain spring day, when I happened to visit this little town for the first time, is, and will be the most memorable throughout my life. Looking back now, I find how plainly all events and circumstances and environments joined together to bring this visit about, and also how everything that has developed since then roots in it as the most blessed day of my life. By a mysterious event, the very same day that the globe trotter himself came back to India, an unusual force pulled me forcibly, and I travelled about 300 miles away from home unconsciously to the same destination. Just as I was getting into a bullock cart to proceed to the railway station, which was a couple of miles away, I heard the cart driver conversing with another man. The word Brunton was mentioned in the conversation. I immediately questioned the driver about it and was astonished to hear that he had the honor that very morning of carrying the famous writer to a house he had engaged on his return to India. I postponed my journey to the station and was driven to his house instead. I introduced myself to Dr. P. Brunton and simply said that I was pleased with his book, a native of the historic temple city of Madurai in South India, and that I had had the good fortune of a college education in the missionary college there. I also stated that my grandfather had been one of the great Sanskrit Pandits of his day, though I knew but little of that language. No boots, no socks, no coat, no tie or bow, and no hat were found on Brunton's person, much less a stiff collar and a waistcoat. I mention this because I had always thought white men insisted on wearing these things. He offered me tea and let me talk for a while. The result was that I was installed after 20 minutes as his literary and personal secretary. The house was purely an Indian style small bungalow with a big courtyard in the middle. No carpets covered the naked, rough bricked floor, no wallpapers adorned the ill-plastered walls, no tapestries hung over doors and windows. There was not even one glass-paned window. The rough wood doors, without paint or varnish, creaked on their hinges. 3 small tables, 2 chairs, an easy chair of light wood and canvas, and a small one-doored cupboard besides a cot, all of the camp folding pattern, were the only furniture to be found. We were away from the noise and din of the bazaar in the surroundings, most suitable for literary work of a high and concentrated nature. For the first few days, I was unpacking trunks, getting things straight, and carrying books into rooms. I had to fix up Indian maps on walls, arrange the office, knock nails into walls, move suitcases and dressing cases into their proper places, make many bazaar purchases, and do dozens of other little jobs. Then we opened up a packet containing dozens of unanswered letters from all over the world. They were in different sizes, shapes, colors, and even languages. They were typewritten, pen-written, and penciled. They bore dates stretching back over all the dates in the calendar for more than a year. PB was apologetic for this last fact, but said his life being what it was, he could not help it. His cook and parcel servant was in some way not unlike his simple living master. He was a lean chap, talking hardly any English. 1 yard of plain white sheet around his waist and one shirt were all his clothing. This has to be compared to the stylishly dressed butler who usually serve Europeans in India. In spite of his poor appearance, he was a cook of no mean kind, for as I came to know later, he had served his master faithfully for nearly 6 years and had travelled in many parts of India with him. The secret of his success was that he made the best tasting soup, the best curried vegetables, and cooked the finest rice. One wondered how such delicious things could come out of that medieval kitchen at the back of the house. If he were not watchful for a single minute, the food, whether raw or cooked, would be stolen away by the innumerable monkeys. In fact, once I saw his master projecting himself from out of his office like a bullet from the gun in hot pursuit of a monkey which had just stolen and was carrying off a typewriter ribbon from his table. One day, PB told me abruptly that he had decided to move away from this little town, that his work there had come to an end, and that everything had to be packed and all local matters disposed of within 12 hours. I could never have managed the removal so swiftly before I entered his service, but the training in efficiency, concentration, and initiative which I absorbed from him every day enabled me to do it then. We spent a week in the capital city of Madras, and then a telegram came and we were off again to the interior of the country. We became guests of the ruling prince of an Indian state. Some officers of the state met us at the station and conducted us in 2 fine motor cars on a fast, smooth drive by drivers in gorgeous livery to a fine, palatially fitted up bungalow. PB was then a socially busy soul. State dinners, tea parties with Rajas, and private palace conferences were the order of the day. From the village to the town, from the house to the palace, from the bullock cart to the saloon car, from a small-looking glass held between the fingers to gorgeous wall mirrors. What a change! It can only be imagined. Out flew dinner coats, polished boots, felt hats, walking sticks, white collars, etc. And soon PB was completely transformed. Even his conservative secretary, with leg cloths and shirt, was moved and got into a pair of trousers and wore a collar and tie. The whiz of the electric fan and the gentle ring of the telephone bell replaced the primitive arrangements of our former home. This sudden change was typical of many which we made in the following years. I was at first surprised, but later accustomed to the ease with which PB adapted himself to all kinds of environments and people. He passed from palace to hut or vice versa with perfect smoothness and yet with complete inward indifference. He disliked the formal conventions but submitted to them when necessary. He detested public functions in his honor and never attended them if he could avoid doing so. External appearances never weighed with him, nor deceived his sense of spiritual values. He never forgot or lost himself, whatever the surroundings. He lived in the world when fate or duty called him, but was not of it. My secretaryship filled my days with an interest I had not known before. Secretaryship indeed. It was like 12 different lives in one, handling an international correspondence with 5 continents in 1 hour, superintending the cook and servants and bazaar purchases the next, keeping away undesired visitors, plunging into meditation at intervals, walking with him each night after dinner for 2 miles through city, village or jungle, gravely discussing spiritual questions or joking about the daily events, meeting Maharajas one day and poor coolies the next. Such was my bewildering, unusual life. I repaired our typewriters and fountain pens, invented office equipments from primitive materials, even picked open locks without using keys, as when the keys disappeared to my master's big steamer trunk in which he placed all his money and important manuscripts, documents, notes, and papers. To his pleasant surprise, I successfully opened the locks without injuring them. Such a curious mixture of abilities am I. I was taken raw and uncouth, just over 30 years old, and he trained me on modern lines, made me discard my old-fashioned piece of long, untailored cloth that did duty for clothes, gave me jackets and trousers and neckties, etc., and thus transformed my outer appearance. But the change was equally great in my inner life. The typing of his literary notes, the instructions he conveyed to his students in his letters, the books which he presented to me now and then, as also the personal guidance and advice he imparted to me, all these created a new outlook in my life. Certainly, I now know I have not lived in vain. Our mornings were usually spent on some kind of writing work. PB seldom dictated his literary work, but preferred to write the first draft himself, seated alone in his office, or at those times of the day when the sun was less hot, seated on the flat roof of the house where he could be away from everything and everybody. I would then copy this draft neatly on the typewriter, and he would rewrite it again at his leisure, after which I would again copy the result. On his writing desk, he always kept a bronze lotus-throned figure of the Buddha, which had been presented to him by the Chief Lama of Siam. It was a symbol for him of the teacher of esoteric wisdom, the sage who typified compassion for all creatures. The solemn-looking and deeply calm Buddha watched with pious interest and perhaps some sympathy the living man who sought in a very humble way to imitate him. But in the case of his mail, speed in handling was so necessary that he called my assistants to take down in shorthand what he had to say to the readers, students, and friends with whom he tried to keep in touch, but always in vain, for he was always in great arrears. He usually retired to the comfort of his bedroom to attend to his mail. There, upon the snug bed, with its colored counterpane, a large mass of this correspondence spread out on his lap, and all over the bed, he squatted with open shirt and cotton trousers and dictated paragraph after paragraph in reply. I sat in a chair, businesslike, with a folded turban on my head and squeaking large brown shoes on my feet. My blue fountain pen scribbled rapidly over my notebook. I must not forget the small tray of toast and tea placed at PB's side, that brown nectar which he drank quite often, but which was almost harmless because it was quite weak too. Thus, the preliminary chapters of a new book got themselves shaped, or as the metaphysician would put it, were manifested with name and form, while letters were shaped out for the more fortunate of his numerous international correspondents. A week's mail went out to every corner of the world. After morning's business was over, there followed lunch and a short siesta, then reading newspapers, periodicals, or books, while half resting on the bed in the fierce afternoon heat. Next, interviews with visitors, then the formal tea and toast, and then PB set to further work, usually on research notes or literary material. Records of interviews and the results of his meditations were also scribbled down. He has filled more unpublished notebooks with his discoveries, ideas, reflections, and intuitions than published printed books. I collected these odd pieces, arranged them under proper headings, and typed them suitably into his leather-bound, loose-leaf notebooks ready for future reference. Thus were the religious, mystic, yogic, and philosophic lores of the ancient East brought to light and probed into to their very depths. Thus, too, was PB's keen, ever-active intelligence made to yield its fruits. His swift intuitions flashed into words, and his profound meditations directed to an amazing variety of matters directly or indirectly connected with humanity's spiritual life. After dinner, we generally went for a walk to get some exercise. PB always carried his walking stick, while I always carried a pocket electric torch to save us from treading on any possible snakes or scorpions. Sometimes we went into the forest, but more often into the lonely roads on the outskirts of the town. Both of us were short figures, but whereas he was slim, I was sturdy and prided myself on being able to act as his bodyguard should it ever become necessary. Lastly, after the day's activities had ended, but before dinner, there came the real life and secret of the man. He went out on the open upper veranda, squatted on a carpet, and was lost in deep meditation for nearly an hour. Meditation, calm and serene at dusk and under an oriental sky, is a thing which can better be experienced than described. His secretary often joined him, although in keeping with the old adage that a turkey fowl saw a peacock dancing and thinking himself equally beautiful, began to unfold its feathers. Or else we would retire when the need of greater privacy became heavy to PB's own room and bolt the door from inside. He would then place a green crystal Buddha head, which he had brought from China, at the far end of the room and switch on the tiny electric bulb which was hidden inside it. The head emanated a phosphorescent greenish light, and the eyes appeared mysteriously alive. The whole room had an unearthly subdued light. In its serenity and silence, we easily fell into calm, deep, and concentrated meditation. I wonder how many people realize how absolutely necessary this meditation is for PB when such great pressure constantly devolves on his mind in his attempt to encourage, uplift, and enlighten so many individuals as well as the world at large. On occasions, with the magnetic and telepathic influence of PB strongly felt, I sometimes forgot all my personal limitations and flew to ethereal heights, leaving my physical moorings in the body and soaring into vast space with a feeling of oneness with all the universe. My feeble experience was only an echo or reflection of PB's swift winking into an even deeper state. Such joint meditations destroyed all the worries and miseries of life and brought great peace to my mind and went a long way to develop me spiritually. And 100 times more was this so when in the immediate presence and under the guidance of PB.